This video is a quick review of how to deal with fractions, decimals, and percents, and how to convert between them. We'll start with the first one here of changing a fraction to a decimal. So let's say we start with the fraction of 1/4. So the fraction 1/4 looks like this. And probably many of you already know what 1/4 is as a decimal, but basically what we do here is we take the numerator. Don't forget, whoops, let me just fix that up. That is the number on top, the numerator. So we take the numerator and we divide it by the denominator down here. And that will give us our value as a percent. So change a fraction to a decimal. Sorry, that would give it to us as a decimal. To change a fraction to a decimal, we're going to divide the numerator by the denominator. So on our calculator, we'll do 1 divided by 4, and that will give us 0.25. And that is the decimal equivalent of 1/4. Now, we may want to change that decimal to a percent. So in order to go from the decimal, we'll stick with the same example. In order to go from the decimal to a percent, well, what you have to do in this case is you would just multiply this by 100, and that would give you what the percentage is. So 0.25 times 100 would give us 25%. So to change the decimal to a percent, you multiply by 100. Nice and simple. All right, let's go the other way. If we want to change a percent, let's do a different one here. Let's go with 75% to a decimal. We do the opposite. I mean, it's the opposite of this example up here, so we would do the opposite. So we would divide by 100 instead of multiplying by 100. So we would take that 75, divide it by 100. Again, you can go to your calculator and do this, or if you can do it without a calculator, that works too. And we get 0.75. So far that's changing a fraction to a decimal, decimal to percent, and a percent to a decimal. Those I think are the easier conversions to do. So let's look at maybe some of the more challenging one. So let's look at changing a decimal to a fraction. Let's do that other one that we just did on the previous page. Here's a decimal, 0.75, and we want to change this to a fraction. Well, in order to do this properly, you really need to understand place value. So we need to know that these are tenths and these are hundredths. So really, this is just 75 hundredths, or 7/10ths and 5 100ths, which is 75 hundredths. So we could write that as a fraction and go from there. If you wanted to take a little bit of a shortcut, so what did we say? We said that this was 75 hundredths. And then it is important to reduce the fraction. I'm going to come back to that as well. So the way that it's described up here is to change the decimal to a fraction. You put the entire amount. So take this whole number here without the decimal, and that becomes your numerator. You don't need the 0 out front, but your numerator becomes 75. No decimal. And then your denominator becomes a 1 with a 0, as many zeros as there are place values to the right of the decimal. So we have a place value in the tenths, so we need a 0 for the tenths. And then we also need a 0 for the hundredths, so we get 75 100ths. So once we've done this, we need to reduce the fraction. And in this case, we can divide the numerator by 25. So we're trying to find the biggest number we can divide both of these fractions by. So we can divide the numerator by 25. And if we do that in the numerator, we have to do that in the denominator as well. 75 divided by 25 is 3. And 100 divided by 25 is 4. So we get 3/4 here. So that's how we can change a decimal to a fraction. And then since percent means out of, and just a reminder, percent means out of 100. And if we want to change a percent to a fraction, maybe we'll do an example and we'll try to put it in words afterwards. So let's say we want to change 30% to a fraction. 30% to a fraction, well, 30% means out of 100. So you take your percent and write it as the numerator over 100, and then again we should reduce that fraction as much as we can. So in this case we could divide the numerator by 10 and the denominator by 10. And we get a fraction of 3/10. So since percent means out of 100, to change a percent to a fraction, you divide the percent. Sorry, let's not say divide. Put the percent in the numerator. And 100 in the denominator. Whoops, that should be a 100. And again, we should reduce our fractions so that they're in lowest terms. So there's a quick summary on how to convert percents, decimals, and fractions and move between all of them.